Hello everybody to lesson 3 of CSS for attractive design. In this lesson we will know the selector in CSS and what they are and where to use them and how to use them and what are their types. So first of all, we should know that the selectors are the elements that we use, or the elements or the handles that we use it to control the element and decorate it and to add styles for them. So with the selectors we could call any element, whether specific or group of them. We will know them now and we will understand them carefully. So the first, we should know an example of CSS. So we should know that I will delete this thing. This is an HTML code. You should know it before you go to the CSS. So first of all, you should know that for example, here I write you an example which is h4, for example, and this is an example of CSS. Then we have here the color, which could be the property. Then the property, we have a value, for example blue, red, or any value. Then semicolon, which close. Then another value, which for example we could say the width or the font size. And the font size could be, for example, 30 pixel. Okay, so as we want. So here we have, so what we call this first one? The first one we call the selector. So when we mean the selector, we mean that the selector has many types, as we will learn them. They are whether element or CSS or ID, and we will know them now. So the second one is the attribute. Then we have the value. Then we have here another attribute. The semicolon separate between an attribute and another attribute. Here is another attribute, which is font size. It's named like that. And the other one, which is the value, which is 30 pixel. So this is an example of CSS. So this one that we will talk about, which is selector. So how many selectors do we have? We have 3 types selectors, whether CSS or HTML ID, an ID or an element. So let's start with the CSS. Let's delete that one and go here. We'll write an internal. Okay, so let's see here. We will use the internal CSS code. So here we have, for example, a text, which is an HTML tag, and inside it we will define a class. So here we have the class, which we could define here, and selector. For example, we will start with the class selector and we call it here, for example, selector 1. So now we have selector, which is name is selector 1. How we could call the selector and give it a style? For example, we could say selector 1. Selector 1. Where is it? We should copy and paste it here. Be careful for the spelling. It's case sensitive, means if it's capital or small it will make different. Then we have dot selector 1, and then we'll open this and we will write here the code that we want. For example, I will say color and we'll write, for example, green. Great. So now when we refresh the page, we will see that the color is green. We have no content here. We'll say this is CSS class selector. Great. So when we refresh the page, we'll say it's green, and this is CSS class selector. So to use the CSS class selector, you should create class attribute, and inside we have a value, which is the class. We call it here selector 1, and then inside the style, whether in line or in another file here, you could write here, for example, dot selector, and here we could write, for example, anything we needed. But because then red, but if we refresh the page now, it will stay green. Why? Because we have here a code which is internal. So to know which has a high priority, the inline which we write here, style and so on, is it's printed first. Then if there is no inline, it will go to the internal. If we have an internal, it will be high priority than the external. If we have no, there is a problem here. Yes, we have the same. We should close this. What is the problem? I see. The problem is that we haven't linked that thing here. So I will link it. I will say link. Then I will say relation, which is style sheet. Then href. Then we say CSS. Save it. Refresh. It's easy. So if we delete this code, we will go directly to the other code, which is here red, and that means color should be red. It will refresh now. It works perfectly. So we understand now. The high priority is for the inline, then the internal, then the external. Now the color will be green. So this was the class selector. So we could call the class from here or from the external. Great. Then we have the ID selector. We could have the same code, but here we will have ID, and the ID should be unique. So we will write selector 2, which is class, which is ID, would be ID selector. Great. So now if we refresh the page, there was nothing, but we could take this thing here and write it, and be careful here when we write or when we deal with ID selector. We write hash, then the name of the selector, then we write the code color blue. Okay, great. Now let's refresh the page, and it's great. The color is blue. So we understand now. We have the class selector that we create here, and we call it there. Then we have the ID selector we have created here. Then we have the element selector. What do we mean with element selector? Element selector means the h1 here is an HTML element, so it could be a selector. The body here is a selector. Any text, for example, I have an image. This image is a selector, an element selector. So great. So how we could call them? We could call them with that type. When you type h1 and open that and write whatever you want here. For example, I write here color is green, blue, let's see red. But we should notice there will not be any different. Why? Because we have previous selectors. So we have h1, we have an ID, and we have a class. So if we delete them, it will work perfect. We should delete that one. So now the element selector is working now, which is h1, which is this one. So let's refresh and see it's work. So that was the selector. So we have 3 types selector. I'm sorry to repeat these things, but we should repeat them because they are so important and we will know them later. So also we have another so we have here another element that we should take care about, which would be the group selector. Group selector means we could have many elements, for example, and have the same selector for them. For example, I'll create here h1, and I'll give it class selector 1. Great. Then I will close it and write here another. I will say other selector, other class selector. Okay, great. So we could create that many times, and here we'll have and see what we have. Okay, the same. So h1 is mean we have group. So h1, which is this one and the other, and all these lines are h1. means element 1, heading 1. So they are group because they have the same name. So when we define this or we change it, for example, for green, we could change all of them at the same time. Sorry, there's problem. Yes, color green. What's the problem? Header 1, color is green. Refresh the page. CSS ID selector. I mean, there's some problem, I think. But what is it? We delete that one. I mean, yes, we have identified here. So it will be the same. But if we delete that link and only use, I think we have it here. I will delete the link to the external CSS and we'll focus here only with this code that we have here. So let's save it and refresh what we have. All the text will change to green. Why? Because we have gray, we have group selector, which is h1. Also, we could change it to that selector, for example. So we'll see selector 1, which is we should have dot, because dot for, as we learned, for the class. So every element has the same class, will have the same style. So as we see here in the page, except the ID selector, it has another styles because it's not in the same group. This was the lesson for this session, and see you in the next. I hope there is a note. If you haven't subscribed or liked the video, you should like and subscribe so that we could help us to continue in these lessons. Thanks for watching and see you in the next. Bye.